Beneath the official stories of war and victory lies another archive, one written in vanished ink and sealed beneath decades of dust. It whispers of convoys that never arrived, of scientists erased from every ledger, of machines that hummed in the dark long after the guns fell silent. The war may have ended in 1945, but its shadow never did. It stretched through the corridors of intelligence offices, through laboratories built on stolen blueprints, through governments that learned to bury their miracles beside their mistakes. What remains are fragments, transmissions caught between frequencies, orders signed by ghosts, coordinates no one claims to own. Each file opens not a chapter of history, but a wound that never healed, a question that no archive dares to answer. Somewhere in that silence, the truth still breathes, waiting to be found or to be forgotten again. Chapter 1: Operation Eclipse and the Vanished Convoy. In the spring of 1945, as the Reich's front collapsed and the Allies closed in from every direction, the North Sea became a graveyard of desperate movements. On the night of April 22nd, under a waning moon, a coded message pulsed through a dying radio network. Eclipse 7 in transit. Cargo Priority 1. The transmission was intercepted by Station X at Bletchley Park, decoded partially through the Type-X machine, and flagged as anomalous due to its non-standard encryption signatures. Analysts noted that the cipher's structure resembled earlier Kriegsmarine codes but included a mathematical anomaly, additional characters that did not correspond to any Enigma rotor setting. The message originated near Kiel, yet within hours, triangulation suggested multiple moving sources, as if the same message were being relayed in sequence across several vessels. The Royal Navy classified it under ultra-special status, assigning it to the 30 Assault Unit, a covert intelligence gathering division led by Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming. At dawn on April 23rd, convoy manifests captured from Hamburg indicated a fleet-designated Convoy, V-42, scheduled to depart for Trondheim under cover of transporting technical research. Materials. The lead ship was listed as U-873, commanded by Kapitän Leutnant Heinrich Müller, not to be confused with the Gestapo chief of the same name. This Müller was a veteran of the 12th U-boat flotilla, known for experimental deep-sea testing near the Skagerrak. The listed escort vessels, including U-867 and the smaller supply sub U-1023, were believed to have been retrofitted with radar countermeasures under the code Project Nebelspiegel, or FOG, Mirror. British intercept units noted that the convoy's departure coincided with the total blackout of German naval frequencies across the Baltic. No Allied aerial reconnaissance ever confirmed their route. 2 days later, a Norwegian fishing crew near Kristiansund reported hearing a low hum beneath the waves, followed by a metallic detonation that shook the ice sheets along the fjord. When Royal Air Force Coastal Command dispatched a Catalina patrol, no debris was visible, only a wide circular pattern of oil that dispersed unnaturally fast, as though absorbed by the water itself. The pilots filed a brief report marked electromagnetic distortion. The entry disappeared from the squadron logbook within a week. By early May, with Germany surrendering, Operation Eclipse was forgotten amid the chaos of occupation. Only a single carbon copy of the transmission survived in the Bletchley Park archives. Labelled inconclusive, in 1968, a declassification review at the Ministry of Defence uncovered references to the vanished convoy in a forgotten MI6 memorandum marked T458 Neptune. It mentioned recovered German documents describing an optical nullification apparatus using interference resonance fields. The surviving schematics, drawn by Dr. Gerhard Kessler, a physicist affiliated with the Peenemünde Army Research Center, were stamped Versuchsreihe 7, meaning Test Series 7. Kessler himself disappeared during the war's final weeks, presumed dead in an air raid. However, CIA records later suggested he had been sighted in Argentina in 1952 under the alias Dr. Karl Meissner, working at an industrial research facility with unexplained military funding. British analysts speculated that Kessler's device, if completed, might have been designed to bend radar waves, a primitive precursor to post-war stealth technology. In 1973, the Royal Navy conducted a deep-sea survey off the Norwegian coast for unrelated submarine wreckage. The sonar logs, now partially released under the Freedom of Information Act, showed faint metallic structures beneath 600 meters of sediment. The coordinates aligned almost perfectly with the last triangulated position of the Eclipse convoy. Divers from HMS Challenger were dispatched, but after descending, they reported unusual magnetic interference that rendered their compasses useless. The dive was aborted within minutes. When they resurfaced, the commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Peter Renshaw, filed a terse note. Area exhibits unknown electrostatic anomalies. Recommend classified continuation. Within a week, the project was reassigned under NATO's Maritime Research Command and relabeled Sub-C, Anomaly Study 12. No results were ever published. Declassified. Correspondence from the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence indicates that the Americans had long been aware of Eclipse. In a 1951 memorandum, an agent stationed in Hamburg wrote of materials recovered from northern waters during joint salvage and apparent post-war integration into radar absorption prototypes. The timing coincides with the development of experimental coating, technologies at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, allegedly derived from captured Axis research. A British liaison officer later admitted privately that Eclipse's disappearance was less an accident than a planned extraction. Some believed the convoy carried more than experimental machinery, perhaps blueprints or data essential to the Reich's rumoured Lichtmeer project, a program focused on directed electromagnetic emission. In 1985, a retired Norwegian naval technician named Ole Carlsen came forward with a faded notebook inherited from his father, who had been part of a local resistance network monitoring German supply routes. The entries from April 1945 describe 3 submarines without insignia, moving north under heavy escort. The last note reads, "Sounded as if the sea itself was humming, not torpedoes, not engines." The handwriting ends abruptly. When Carlsen attempted to submit the notebook to local authorities, it was confiscated by officials citing national security. He never saw it again. Modern researchers who have attempted to piece together Operation Eclipse face a labyrinth of erased records and contradictory accounts. The Kriegsmarine's final war logs make no mention of U-873 after April 22nd, though her existence is confirmed by shipyard invoices at Deutsche Werke, Allied intelligence. Cross-references suggest that Eclipse's designation may have been post-war, a convenient umbrella for multiple converging incidents involving lost vessels. Yet eyewitness patterns, recurring code fragments, and repeated suppression orders indicate deliberate obfuscation rather than coincidence. As of the last available record, dated March 1998, NATO's Hydrographic Office still lists a classified anomaly zone between 64° and 5°, restricted to civilian vessels. Attempts to survey the area using independent research submarines have resulted in unexplained equipment failures, and, in one instance, total signal blackout lasting nearly 20 minutes. When questioned, naval officials state that the region presents unstable geomagnetic interference due to mineral composition, but no geological study supports that claim operation. Eclipse remains a footnote in naval intelligence, officially described as a wartime miscommunication. Yet its echoes persist in technical archives, in declassified fragments of US stealth research, and in whispers among retired operatives who insist the convoy was found, but never retrieved. Whether it sank carrying only untested radar foil or a technology decades ahead of its time, the sea holds its silence. The water above that forbidden coordinate drifts undisturbed, concealing whatever metallic tomb still hums beneath it, still transmitting its unanswered signal through layers of ice and time. Chapter 2: The Minsk Protocol and the Forgotten Trials. In the bleak winter of 1947, while Europe was still scarred by the ashes of the Third Reich, a small tribunal convened in Minsk under the auspices of the Soviet Ministry of State Security, MGB. The proceeding, internally coded as Protocol 46B, was held in a basement courtroom of the former NKVD headquarters on Nemiga Street. Officially, it was to prosecute 27 captured SS medical officers accused of war crimes in occupied Belarus. Yet the trial was never made public, the transcripts never published, and the defendants never officially executed. Only fragments, sealed orders, missing dossiers, and fragments of Soviet communications hint at what truly took place within those walls. Archival fragments uncovered decades later in the Russian state military archive refer to a special case 46B, biochemical applications for cognitive suppression. The language is clinical, detached. A report signed by Colonel Alexei Grinev of the MGB's 4th Directorate describes the prisoners as participants in an unacknowledged section of the Waffen-SS Medical Division, under Dr. Klaus Adler, tasked with testing compounds affecting higher cortical control. According to the testimony of a Soviet interpreter present for preliminary interrogations, the captured officers spoke repeatedly of a project known as Project Morgenlicht, Morning Light. This initiative allegedly sought to induce states of confusion and obedience in human subjects through aerosolized psychoactive agents. The intended use was battlefield conditioning, creating soldiers immune to fear and pain. Soviet intelligence, however, believed it went further. Documents declassified after the dissolution of the USSR reveal that the Soviets were deeply interested in replicating these effects. On February 3, 1947, a top-secret memorandum was sent from Moscow to the head of the Minsk tribunal, instructing that the accused and their formulae be preserved for state use. Days later, several defendants disappeared from their holding cells. The prison guard logs were falsified to suggest suicides by hanging. But a recently uncovered file marked medical transfer bears their names, redirected to Laboratory 12 near Novosibirsk, an installation specializing in neurochemical experimentation. The notation, B46 subjects relocated, appears repeatedly across multiple archives, suggesting that the trial was never about justice, but acquisition. Witness accounts collected from Minsk locals decades later describe unusual nighttime activity during the tribunal. Black trucks without markings arrived at the courthouse, sometimes carrying crates under heavy guard. A janitor named Pavel Rudinsky, whose testimony was recorded in 1961 by a Belarusian historian, recalled the distinct chemical odor that filled the corridors on those nights, a mixture of ether and chlorine. He claimed to have overheard officers arguing in German and Russian about dosage intervals and loss of consciousness without trauma. When Rudinsky attempted to discuss his memories publicly in 1972, he was summoned by state security and ordered to remain silent. Among the trial's missing exhibits was a collection of glass ampules labeled E35 Blau, recovered from an abandoned German field hospital in Smolensk. Soviet chemical analysis identified the substance as an alkaloid derivative with properties similar to scopolamine, but with a slower metabolic decay. A classified pharmacological report attached to the case notes that prolonged exposure induces apathy, erases short-term recall, and impairs volition without total incapacitation. The sample vanished after 1948, and all subsequent references to E35 Blau in Soviet research were redacted. Western analysts reviewing captured files in the 1990s found identical terminology in CIA Project MK Ultra documentation, hinting that both superpowers may have inherited portions of the same research lineage. By 1949, the Minsk Protocol itself had been sealed under order of Lavrenti Beria, marked permanent retention. The reason cited was state security relevance. The file list, preserved in the State Archive of the Russian Federation, contains the names of over 100 Soviet officers, chemists and psychologists attached to the tribunal, many of whom vanished in subsequent purges. In a 1954 internal memo, Colonel Grinev, the same man who authored the initial tribunal order, was denounced for complicity in unsanctioned scientific correspondence. He was executed 3 weeks later. His replacement, Major Valentin Sobolev, ordered the destruction of unnecessary evidence. The next inventory log reads, Protocol 46B, destroyed. Yet traces survived. In 1968, an East German defector named Dr. Ernst Weber provided US intelligence with partial copies of Soviet laboratory notebooks. One entry, dated April 1948, describes continued testing on Group 7. Results include passive compliance and loss of emotional resistance. Weber insisted these were direct continuations of the experiments from Minsk, transferred under the codename Project Mirror. The Americans were skeptical until they noticed that several formula references mirrored data found in confiscated Nazi archives from Dachau and Ravensbrück, specifically the same sequences of chemical notation used to describe early hallucinogens and nerve modulation compounds. The link between Morning Light and MK Ultra became the subject of internal CIA speculation, but never publicly acknowledged. In 1992, following the fall of the Soviet Union, a Belarusian journalist named Elena Durova attempted to locate the original courtroom used in the 1947 tribunal. The building still stood, its basement sealed behind welded steel doors. When the site was finally opened with local authorization, investigators found rusted benches, remnants of medical crates, and a decaying sign reading Prikaz number 46B. Among the debris lay a single surviving reel of magnetic tape, degraded almost beyond recognition. Forensic restoration revealed faint voices speaking German, interrupted by a Russian translator. The fragments are chilling. Patient does not resist. Subject retains consciousness, but no memory. The tape was seized by the Belarusian KGB within hours of discovery. It has not been seen since. What little remains of the Minsk Protocol paints a picture not of vengeance, but of absorption. The Soviets took what they found, both men and materials, and folded it into their own clandestine research apparatus. The West, upon learning of it, did the same. By the mid-1950s, psychological warfare divisions on both sides of the Iron Curtain were testing derivatives of E35 Blau under different names. The memory of the original trial was systematically erased, its existence denied in every subsequent historical volume on post-war justice. Even the Nuremberg archives, exhaustive in their reach, contain not a single reference to Protocol 46B. Today, historians searching for the Minsk Protocol encounter only bureaucratic silence. File numbers exist without corresponding folders. Cross-references in the Russian archives point to non-existent collections. The families of the vanished scientists never received confirmation of death or trial. In 2004, a request under Belarusian declassification law for Case 46B was met with the official statement, "No such record exists." Yet deep in an annex of the Central Archive of the FSB, catalogued under an unrelated cipher, lies a single envelope labelled 46B Morning Light. The contents, according to a leaked index, include one photograph of the defendants, one medical diagram, and one short notation handwritten in German. Obedience through forgetfulness. The Minsk Protocol remains a spectral trial, never acknowledged, never concluded. Its courtroom is now an empty basement beneath a government building where clerks pass each day unaware of the ghosts buried in its walls. Whatever was tested there, whatever compound turned men into instruments of will, has already seeped into the veins of history. And like the compound itself, the memory fades, leaving only compliance in its wake. Chapter 3. The Iron Cathedral Beneath the Alps. In the summer of 1945, as Allied forces swept through Bavaria, a detachment of the US 3rd Infantry Division stumbled upon a mountain entrance near Berchtesgaden that did not appear on any Wehrmacht construction map. The tunnel mouth was carved directly into the limestone, sealed by an armoured blast door bearing the faint insignia of IG Farben. When engineers forced the entry open, they found a network of corridors extending deep beneath the Obersalzberg region. The walls were lined with thick iron panels and an intricate wiring system that hummed faintly, even though the power grid had supposedly been destroyed weeks earlier. In the center chamber stood a structure unlike anything the soldiers had seen, a vast cylindrical assembly of magnetized steel plates surrounded by copper coils the size of vehicles. The blueprint fragments discovered in a nearby office bore the heading Anlage 12, Eisenkirche, meaning Facility 12, Iron Cathedral. US Army intelligence quickly secured the area, establishing it as a restricted zone under the authority of the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, Detachment 970. Initial documentation classified the discovery as technological priority material. A surviving German engineer, captured hiding in a nearby village, identified the site as part of the Wunderwaffe program, a special weapons research branch under SS General Hans Kammler. The engineer, whose name appears in surviving records as Dr. Otto Brandt, claimed the Iron Cathedral was not a conventional weapon, but a generator of fields. When interrogators pressed him on the term, Brandt reportedly said, "Fields of silence, fields that erase." Within 48 hours of his statement, Brandt was found dead in his holding cell, allegedly by cyanide ingestion. No capsule was ever recovered from his body. The surviving documents from the facility were immediately divided between the Americans and the British. The US referred to them as File Group E47 Electromagnetic Anomaly. while British intelligence adopted the designation Blue Harp. Each side sought to understand what the Iron Cathedral had been intended to do. Technical notes, most unsigned, spoke of resonant harmonics capable of neutralizing aerial detection and propagation effects observed beyond measurable range. The Soviet Union, learning of the discovery through its intelligence networks, filed a diplomatic protest demanding access to the captured material. The protest was ignored. By 1946, the entire tunnel system had been sealed with explosives, and the existence of Anlager 12 was officially denied. Declassified correspondence between US Army engineers in 1947 reveals a growing unease. One report describes residual electrical activity continuing within the Iron Cathedral, even after its generators were dismantled. Instruments recorded oscillations between 17 and 22 Hz, an inaudible vibration that interfered with radio transmission. One technician wrote that the machinery hums even when disconnected. Another, Lieutenant Joseph Hanley, later filed a personal note claiming that during inspection of the chamber he experienced disorientation, ringing ears, and a sensation of pressure, as if the air itself were vibrating. He died 2 years later from an unexplained cerebral hemorrhage. His autopsy remains sealed. By 1950, under Operation Paperclip, several German scientists who had worked on electromagnetic propulsion and radar interference were quietly brought to the United States. Among them was Dr. Helmut Krüger, a physicist associated with I.G. Farben's optical field division. Krüger's American debriefing notes, obtained through partial FOIA release, reference preliminary resonance tests conducted at Obersalzberg using inductive compression rings. He warned that the frequencies used had unintended physiological consequences. A line struck through in red ink reads, "Prolonged exposure induces catatonia in animal subjects." Krüger died in 1953 in what the official record calls an industrial accident at a test facility in Nevada. The British, meanwhile, maintained a separate investigation at the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough under the codename Project Churchbell. A series of experiments using scaled magnetic arrays reportedly reproduced low-frequency vibrations, similar to those described in the Obersalzberg files. The results were marked operationally irrelevant, but classified top secret. In a declassified 1957 report, a scientist anonymously warned, "The field does not dissipate, it lingers. It cannot be measured directly, only felt." The language was so uncharacteristically emotional for a military document that MI5 redacted the author's name entirely. For decades, the myth of the Iron Cathedral persisted among amateur historians and conspiracy theorists. Some claimed it was a Nazi particle accelerator, others an early radar cloaking device. Yet no verifiable technical drawings survived. In 1981, a group of West German spelunkers exploring near Berchtesgaden claimed to have found remnants of a sealed tunnel system with melted iron supports and traces of heavy magnetite deposits. They submitted photographs to local authorities, but the images were confiscated and the entrance was resealed within days. Official explanation: unstable geological cavity. In 1995, newly declassified American aerial photographs taken in May 1945 revealed faint geometric outlines on the Obersalzberg slopes matching the supposed location of Anlager 12. Cross-analysis with seismic data indicated a subterranean cavity extending nearly 500 meters downward. When journalists requested permission to survey the area, the German government denied access, citing environmental hazards from wartime munitions. Nonetheless, satellite scans from 2003 detected persistent magnetic anomalies in the region, anomalies inconsistent with natural geology. A physicist from the University of Munich who analyzed the data remarked that the readings suggest a buried metallic structure still emitting low-frequency pulses. 2 months later, the dataset was withdrawn from public access. What little remains of the Iron Cathedral's documentation implies a dual purpose: defensive and psychological. One Soviet intelligence summary, recovered from the archives of the GRU, described it as a resonance weapon designed to disorganize human nervous systems through sustained oscillation. Western analysts dismiss this as propaganda, yet the symptom descriptions, vertigo, hallucinations, loss of balance, mirror those reported by Allied personnel who first entered the site. The question of intent remains unresolved. Was the Iron Cathedral meant to protect, to destroy, or to control? An obscure entry from an American technical report in 1946 may offer the only clue. Titled Phase Variance in Controlled Magnetic Architecture, it contains a single paragraph referencing subjective harmonics and perception suppression effects consistent with ultrasonic resonance. At the bottom of the page, in handwritten script, someone had added, "Sound of metal praying." The phrase reappears later in a CIA memo from 1958 discussing unexplained acoustic phenomena at decommissioned test sites, suggesting that whatever the Iron Cathedral was, fragments of its concept were resurrected under other names. Today, the site remains sealed beneath the Bavarian soil. Locals claim that when storms roll over the mountains, the ground emits a faint hum audible only at night. Scientists dismiss it as mere wind resonance through collapsed tunnels. Yet hikers who stray too near the restricted zones report nausea, headaches, and the feeling of vibration beneath their feet. None of these symptoms are documented officially, but the pattern repeats often enough to suggest a lingering presence, a residual echo of machinery that refuses to die. The Iron Cathedral stands as a ghost of an unfinished dream, a convergence of science, desperation, and faith in technology's power to reshape reality. Buried under layers of stone and secrecy, it continues to haunt the post-war world that inherited its fragments. The Allied officers who once stood before its humming core are gone, their reports redacted into silence. But deep beneath the Alps, the iron still hums, an unending requiem for the century that tried to make gods of machines. Chapter 4. Operation Night. Plume, the Arctic Transmissions. In February 1952, when the polar night still cloaked the Arctic in an endless blue twilight, a Canadian weather station at alert, Nunavut, the northernmost inhabited settlement on Earth, began detecting faint Morse code bursts over their shortwave receivers. The signals repeated every 7 hours, always on frequency 9.385 MHz, and bore a peculiar prefix, LW. At first, the operators dismissed it as atmospheric reflection from European transmitters, but the signal strength and modulation were inconsistent with civilian traffic. When decoded, the first complete transmission read, LW7, polar route safe, cargo intact. The call sign matched none in Allied records. 2 days later, it transmitted again, this time including the word Edelweiss, a Luftwaffe call word last seen in 1944. Operation Night Plume was born from that moment, a joint investigation between the US Strategic Air Command and the Royal Canadian Air Force to locate the source of a phantom signal that should have died. With the Third Reich declassified after 1989, Night Plume's mission files read like an unfolding Cold War ghost story. A reconnaissance flight from Thule Air Base, Greenland, piloted by Major Robert Hanley, first triangulated the signal's origin to a sector near Ellesmere Island, deep within an ice shelf, then largely unmapped. On March 4, 1952, two C-47 aircraft carrying radar technicians and Arctic surveyors were dispatched under radio silence. The weather was clear but unnervingly still. When the lead aircraft reached the coordinates, approximately 82 degrees, 60 degrees, its magnetic compass began to drift, rotating slowly in circles. The co-pilot recorded a reading deviation of 37 degrees north by northeast. Moments later, the signal they were tracking ceased abruptly, replaced by a steady carrier tone. The team established a temporary camp near the signal's origin and began ground-based triangulation using portable receivers. Within 24 hours, they detected residual emissions. Short, intermittent pulses resembling a repeating distress beacon. The pattern was unmistakably Morse but oddly mechanical, as if automatically generated. The next day, while scanning the horizon from an elevated ridge, an observer spotted a dark metallic form, half buried in ice, roughly 800 meters away. It was the fuselage of a large aircraft, its tail section shattered, but the insignia still faintly visible beneath frost. A black cross on white field. The Balkenkreuz of the German Luftwaffe. The aircraft was later identified as a Junkers Ju 290A-7, a long-range transport plane used in 1944 for special missions. Yet according to all known German military records, no such aircraft was ever assigned to the Arctic theatre. Inside the wreck, the men found evidence of hurried abandonment, ration tins with German labelling, a flight log frozen to the floor, and a series of lead cylinders sealed with wax and stamped Reichsforschungsrat, the Reich Research Council. Each was labeled only with sequential numbers and a symbol resembling a stylized magnetic pole. When opened, the cylinders contained metal spools wound with what appeared to be fine copper wire, along with coded notes written in a mixture of German and scientific notation. One entry, later translated by intelligence analysts, referred to field tests under polar resonance conditions. Another mentioned anomalous compass behavior consistent with local distortion. The log stopped abruptly on May 7, 1945, the day after Germany's unconditional surrender. As word of the discovery reached Washington and Ottawa, a small team from U.S. Strategic Air Command's Technical Intelligence Division arrived to secure the site. Their official cover was meteorological cooperation. In reality, their orders were to recover all material and transport it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. A partial debrief written by Captain Leonard Price described an atmosphere of quiet unease. Instruments malfunctioned frequently near the wreck. Compasses reversed polarity, and photographic equipment jammed. A radio operator noted that while stationed inside the fuselage, he could still hear faint Morse tapping from the frozen transmitter, though it had no connected power source. His log entry ends with the line, "It's still sending, even when we cut the cables." By late March, a heavy transport plane extracted the recovered cylinders and flew them south under strict secrecy. The remaining wreckage was destroyed with thermite charges to prevent discovery. Locals later claimed to see pillars of smoke on the horizon that burned green against the night. The official night plume report, classified top secret, concluded that the source of the signal originated from an automated transmission device aboard the recovered aircraft and represented no continuing operational threat. Yet appended to the report is an addendum marked for eyes only stating that subsequent analysis revealed the copper wire spools were not ordinary conductors. They exhibited residual magnetic polarization far exceeding known parameters. Right field physicists suggested the wire had been exposed to an intense electromagnetic flux, possibly related to experimental communications research undertaken by the Reich's Polar Forschungsdivision, a department that officially never existed. Years later, scattered declassifications revealed traces of night plume throughout Cold War defense projects. A 1958 memorandum from the US Air Force Research Division referenced data derived from recovered polar transmission system, believed German origin. The document discussed the possibility of long-range radio reflection through polar ionospheric anomalies, an early precursor to the HARP, experiments that would follow decades later. Another internal report linked the recovered materials to attempts at magnetoionic field propagation, an obscure term suggesting communication through direct modulation of the Earth's magnetic field, rather than through atmospheric transmission. Civilian researchers who later reviewed declassified fragments noticed disturbing consistencies. The coordinates of the crash corresponded almost exactly with a zone of persistent auroral interference, an area where radio reception remains unstable even today. Local Inuit hunters from Grise Fjord still recount stories passed down from elders who saw fire in the ice in the 1950s, describing a luminous column that appeared to move with the wind. Some modern geophysicists suggest the event may have been related to post-war nuclear testing fallout. Others whisper of something else, a resonance continuing long after the engines froze. In 1974, a retired Canadian signals officer named Thomas Reeve published a memoir privately printed in a run of 50 copies. Within it, he described his role as a monitoring specialist at Alert Station during the night plume period. Reeve claimed the transmissions never stopped completely. Instead, they evolved. Over months, he recorded new sequences of Morse pulses that no longer corresponded to any recognizable code. He wrote, "It was as if the signal were learning." When questioned in later years, Reeve admitted he destroyed the tapes on government instruction, but retained his handwritten logs. Those logs vanished after his death in 1982, taken by unidentified officials described only as foreign auditors. Today, the coordinates once tied to night plume remain restricted under Canada's Northern Airspace Directive as Zone 16. Electromagnetic interference prohibition. The reason cited is satellite disruption. Risk. No civilian overflight has been authorized since 1961. Every attempt by independent expeditions to reach the supposed crash site has ended prematurely, due to magnetic navigation failure or sudden storms. The 2013 Arctic Survey expedition, led by Dr. Anna Holmstrom, reported that their GPS equipment froze for 48 hours while traversing an area matching the old coordinates. Holmström's later field journal included an unnerving note. When the wind drops, you can hear it, the clicking, like a key being pressed. Over and over, whether the night Plume transmissions were remnants of Nazi polar research, natural geomagnetic resonance, or an undisclosed post-war experiment remains unproven. The declassified documents end abruptly in 1954, when the project was officially concluded. But in the quiet of the Arctic night, with the aurora shimmering above the ice, radio enthusiasts still report hearing faint rhythmic taps on obsolete shortwave bands. The pattern repeats every 7 hours. The signal strength waxes and wanes with the northern lights, and somewhere, perhaps under layers of permafrost, a frozen transmitter continues to whisper across the decades. Edelweiss. Edelweiss. Cargo intact. Chapter 5. The Osenberg List and the Vanished Scientists. When Allied forces entered Göttingen in April 1945, they seized the remnants of the Reich's research administration and uncovered a trove of personnel files cataloguing Germany's scientific elite. Among them was a partly burned document titled Sonderliste Osenberg, compiled under the supervision of engineer Dr. Werner Osenberg, head of the Defense Research Association. This list was intended to identify scientists of strategic importance to national survival. The Allies understood its value immediately. From it came the foundation of Operation Paperclip, the covert program that transferred Nazi scientists to the United States. But as later audits revealed, the version of the Osenberg list captured in Göttingen was incomplete. At least 50 names, corresponding to a shadow category labelled VR-Stufe, Verschlusssache, restricted level, were absent from all post-war transfer manifests. These individuals simply disappeared between April and June 1945. Their projects dissolved into silence. A British field report dated May 12, 1945, written by Captain Arthur Llewellyn of the Scientific Intelligence Division, referenced an encounter with German engineers who claimed that several VR scientists had been evacuated south under SS escort in the last days of the war. Their destination was marked only as Bureau 10, believed to be a code name for a research enclave hidden somewhere in the Harz Mountains. Llewellyn's notes describe a rumor that these men specialized in resonant metallurgy, the manipulation of alloys under harmonic frequency to achieve weight reduction and energy storage effects. Though dismissed as pseudo-physics at the time, fragments of correspondence between I.G. Farben and the Reich Research Council later confirmed that such studies had existed under the name Project Klangmetall, sound metal. The files were never recovered. When the US Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, GIOA, began processing the Osenberg scientists for relocation, a discrepancy appeared in their records. The master list ended abruptly at entry 4037, followed by a line typed in a different font. Transferred, unknown jurisdiction. A marginal annotation added in pencil reads, by order H. Kammler. SS General Hans Kammler, who oversaw the V2 program and the underground Mittelwerk facilities, was presumed dead by suicide in May 1945, yet unverified sightings placed him in the Alps weeks later. The implication was that he, or one of his subordinates, had ordered the removal of specific scientific personnel from Allied custody before the surrender. No one knew where they went. By 1946, both the Soviets and the Americans had noticed the missing names. Soviet intelligence referred to them as the Osenberg Ghosts. A GRU memorandum dated March 3, 1947, claimed that at least 12 of these individuals had resurfaced under false identities in the French occupation zone, working at a facility codenamed Atelier Nord. When the French were questioned, they denied knowledge of any such installation. Yet declassified correspondence from the French Air Ministry in 1951 mentions a research annex outside Toulouse specializing in advanced materials for aeronautical structures. The facility was abruptly closed that same year, and its location erased from all subsequent maps during NATO's base realignment. Locals in the nearby commune of Saint-Girons recalled convoys of military trucks arriving at night, loaded with equipment and a heavy armed presence for months thereafter. Nothing remained but a fenced-off field and a single concrete slab bearing scorch marks. Throughout the 1950s, Western intelligence agencies quietly attempted to reconstruct the VR section of the Osenberg list. A memorandum from the CIA's technical services staff, dated 1953, noted probable relocation of several key personnel to neutral territories under corporate cover. Specifically, the document cited an engineering firm in Zurich named Hallberg Instruments AG, which appeared suddenly in 1948 with unknown investors. Bank records later revealed its founders used falsified Swiss citizenship documents and conducted transactions through Argentine intermediaries. Hallberg's research focus, vibrational stress analysis in alloy systems, echoed the lost Klangmetall program. In 1961, the company dissolved overnight, its laboratories emptied. A subsequent audit of its assets revealed a series of financial transfers to a NATO-affiliated front in Paris, suggesting post-war integration of its discoveries into Western defense contracts. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, parallel developments hinted that they too had recovered fragments of the same research. KGB archive note Nogger 129B, released in 1994, describes a 1950s initiative called Project Zvuk, centered on metallic field interaction under oscillatory magnetism. The Soviet terminology mirrors the German phrase Schwingungsmetal, found in the surviving Peenemünde papers. This convergence implied that both blocks possessed elements of the missing work. The difference lay in attribution. Neither acknowledged the scientists responsible. In 1978, a retired German physicist named Dr. Hermann Krüger gave a recorded interview to Der Spiegel magazine, claiming he had been part of a secret post-war consortium tasked with reassembling fragments of Klangmetall research for NATO. He described visiting a heavily guarded site near Toulouse in 1950, where he saw rows of electromagnetic forges producing alloys that sang when struck. Krüger's story was dismissed as delusional until, 5 years later, seismic readings from the same region recorded unexplained subterranean vibrations at harmonic frequencies matching those described in his interview. When journalists attempted to contact him again, Krüger was dead, officially from a fall down a stairwell. Anomalous documents recovered from the Bundesarchiv in 2009 deepened the mystery. Among them was an unsigned 1944 memorandum addressed to Osenberg himself, referencing Phase 2 mass resonance trials, and signed only with the initials EK. Analysts speculated the author could be physicist Erich Kalveit, a researcher who disappeared in 1945 and never appeared on any Allied roster. Attached to the memo was a rough sketch of an apparatus labeled Chamber A3, showing a cylindrical chamber surrounded by concentric rings, remarkably similar to later depictions of post-war resonance furnaces used in classified aerospace metallurgy. One annotation in faint pencil reads, "Target density below 1.0, stable after field application." No conventional metallurgy could explain such figures. By the 1980s, the name Osenberg had become synonymous with conspiracy among historians of technology. Declassified American aerospace files occasionally reference materials of unknown origin, tested during early stealth, coating experiments at Groom Lake and Edwards Air Force Base. The metallurgical composition, lightweight, yet magnetically responsive, bore no known alloy pattern. When questioned, project engineers said the samples were legacy stock from European sources. The timing and chemical ratios matched descriptions from Klangmetall documents. None of the scientists involved could identify who supplied them. Even into the 21st century, echoes of the missing Osenberg scientists persist. In 2002, a NATO contractor conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys near Saint-Girons detected large metallic masses buried beneath 2 meters of soil. The data was classified, and excavation was denied by French defense authorities. Freedom of information requests filed in 2010 were refused on the grounds of national security. The coordinates correspond precisely with those marked Atelier, Nord on the long-lost 1947 GRU map. No explanation has ever been provided. The fate of the vanished scientists remains an enigma suspended between denial and necessity. Every superpower benefited from their absence. Every archive shows evidence of erasure. The Osenberg list, once a bureaucratic catalogue of the Reich's intellectual machinery, became a roadmap to a post-war scavenger hunt. One fought not for weapons, but for the minds that could conceive them. Somewhere in the crossfire between surrender and survival, 50 names were absorbed into the machinery of new empires. No graves, no obituaries, no acknowledgements. Only the silent entry remains at the end of the original document. Transferred, unknown jurisdiction. The paper itself, browned and brittle, rests today in a sealed archive in Washington, its edges frayed, the ink faded to a grey whisper. The final signature is incomplete, as though interrupted mid-stroke. What began as a wartime record ended as a ledger of ghosts, engineers who slipped through the collapse of one regime only to be resurrected in another. And beneath the bureaucratic dust of 70 years, the question endures. Where did the minds behind the VR Stufa go, and what did they build in the silence that followed the war's end? The answer, like the missing entries, remains redacted. The deeper one searches, the colder the trail becomes, as if history itself conspires to protect its darkest inventions. Beneath layers of secrecy and silence, time has turned evidence into rumor and rumor into warning. The names are gone, the laboratories sealed, yet the echoes remain, flickering like coded signals beneath the surface of what we think we know. Perhaps some truths were never meant to be documented, only endured by those who built them. In the end, the real war was never fought for land or ideology, but for knowledge too dangerous to name, knowledge that slipped through the cracks of surrender and took root in the unseen world that followed. And as every generation digs closer to it, the same question returns like static in the night. What else did they build? And what still waits to be uncovered?